I'm sitting here with a very special guest. Today we have Jill Zimmermann. She is a award-winning sound and audio engineer, born in Krefeld, Germany, but is now working out of Jukasa Recording Studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Jill, happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here.
You came all the way from Canada for this convention.
I did, yes.
Did you have a good trip?
I did. It was nice. Like, I landed in Paris, had a few days there, then went to visit my family for a week, and now I'm in Hamburg. And, starting it off with a great event. I've been here yesterday for half a day, and it's amazing. Like, there's so many people that really have the same kind of interests, and you can connect really nice.
Oh, that's nice. I mean, it's good that you have some more time to get back into the time zone and the groove in Europe.
I know. Didn't want to have a jet lag,
Yeah, it's best not to. We have a few questions. Some are more personal questions, some are more technical questions, and then later on we're going to have some questions from the audience. And I'm going to dive right in. This is the question that a lot of our viewers and readers were excited about. You have studied in Cologne at the School of Audio Engineering.
Correct, yeah.
Now, there are a lot of private universities that offer those kinds of mixing, mastering, recording, and a lot of them are not necessarily very cheap. And I feel like a lot of people are on the fence about going to one of those universities. Would you recommend it, and how was your experience studying like that?
So it really depends on what you want to do later on in life. I also went to the FH Düsseldorf afterwards, and that was, free, as we know.
Yeah.
But I noticed with those two that there's a little different way of learning. So for me, anything audio related, like FH Düsseldorf was great. You learned so much about theory. It was nicely in depth. But the SAE has a lot more studio time.
Yeah.
And so for me, even the diploma I did back then, I think they changed it around because I've been over 10 years ago there, but I did part-time to have 2 years to go into the studios instead of full-time and just 1 year for the same price.
Oh,
So that was one thing that I justified going there because I had a lot more studio time and I really used it. Those people that don't go in the studios much, like, it's a waste of money because you really pay for the studio time and to learn and just hang out with other engineers and just learn from them how they work. And for me, this hands-on approach really helped. But every private institute is different too. So you have to ask them ahead of time, like, how much do you even get into the studios?
Yeah.
Because that's really where, for me, it was worth going. Everything else, not necessarily. But like learning how to actually be in a studio and workflow and just how to run a session, that is invaluable unless you have that access.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's. I feel like a lot of people come in there with different expectations, and they don't necessarily really take the time to, as you said, get hands-on experience on the mixing consoles and on the huge effects and stuff like that. My next question is, you have obviously done a tremendous amount of things in your career. Can you give us a little insight to your journey? Like, you started studying, and then now you're working in Canada and have done a lot of great things. How did all that happen?
So basically, after the SAE, I felt like I wasn't quite ready yet. So that's why I went to the FA. And there you're supposed to have a practical semester. Yeah. And for me, I was already working 3 other jobs. I was doing film for audio for film. I was mixing bands live, and I was working at ZDF for audio for live. But I just didn't feel ready because I wanted to be in the studio.
Yeah.
And I decided to go to the FA. And then in the practical semester, I said, well, I'm working already. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
So I looked for basically having an internship outside of Germany. And I would have had 2 internship possibilities in the US. A friend of mine, because I lived in New Jersey when I was 16 for a year, for high school exchange year, so I knew people there. And then one of my former professors was like, well, I know a studio, but you'll definitely be cycled out. Like, you're just an intern. And then I sent a bunch of applications, and that studio in Canada, Jukasa Studios, was like, well, I mean, internship is nice, but we're looking for an assistant. So I was like, well, that's way better. And that's basically where I put all my effort into. And I told them, look, I'm dependable. I would move there, so I don't have any kind of like family or friends events where I can't come. I would work all the time. I already have 3 jobs while being at university. Like I can work a lot. So I sold myself and they said, okay, you can intern for like 6 months, and if it works, you can stay. But knowing that you can stay, it gives me this extra push to work extra hard and still do extra hard, of course. So from there, I turned into an assistant engineer because I made myself indispensable. And then from there, after I think 2 years, I turned into a full-on engineer and just did sessions all myself and still keep learning because you never stop learning really in this career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an incredible amount of commitment and
Yeah.
a lot of effort and a lot of. So I think that's a nice example of it always gets back to you just really have to work incredibly hard to make something like your career happen.
Yeah.
When you look back on, I mean, you've done crazy productions. You've done a lot. You've worked with Alice Cooper, 3 Days Grace, Alex is on Fire, just to name a few. When you look back on what you've done so far, is there anything that you'd say was your favorite experience or something that just, you keep on thinking back to?
There's a few sessions for sure. I mean, one thing I always say is the July Talk session, because it was to tape. It's up to date, still my only tape session.
Oh,
But I just love how the whole workflow was different. It was a lot more relaxed because you had to actually wait for the tape to run back, right? Like, so that's one of the sessions I really like because it was also very communal. Like, they always cooked dinner for us, so it was,
oh.
it was very
That's
friendly. We
nice.
had dinner time, family time. Another session is definitely 3 Days Grace because it was my first 6-week session, and it's so different when you actually get to hang people too.
Yeah.
Like, you just get to know each other way better as a person, and it's not just like work. We got to get this done. We have a deadline. It's just a lot more relaxed. Like you
Yeah.
hang out more. So that's always one that I really like. And then Alexis on Fire and City and Color were pretty amazing because they had such a vision that they worked so quick.
Yeah.
It was both of these records happened within 1.5 weeks. And it was just go. And you
Yeah.
just had to really, really know what you're doing. So that's where I noticed that all these sessions, when things don't really work out, they help you in the long run because then you have the knowledge to just get things going quick without an
Yeah.
issue. So that's when you really just have your adrenaline high and you just work. But it's also fun because it's great people. But, when people are on a mission,
Yeah.
especially musicians, it goes quick.
That's that's true. That's
Yeah.
pretty amazing. I mean, when you to me or to I guess to most of us who are probably somewhere in our home studios or in our tiny commercial studios, but not really having had the chance to venture off and do bigger projects. If you had to give one piece of advice to like an up and coming sound engineer, music producer, whatever it may be, what would be your advice like to get
Yeah.
to where you are?
So I think the easiest thing is just to always do a good job. Even if you think the music isn't going anywhere, you don't know if that person knows somebody else and recommends you. You don't know if the mastering or the mixing engineer afterwards
Yeah.
is maybe a bigger kind. Like sometimes people just go to a home studio, but then they want to spend the money on mixing or mastering. And if you do a good job, word spreads. And it might take a little bit, but it's just that one person where you did a good job that recommends you that really gets you going further. So treat every session as it's important because they are, because you don't really know the potential of it.
Yeah. That's nice. I think a lot of people it's again I kind of have this I've had the experience of I've studied at a private university too, and I think that advice really needs to sink in with a lot more people because I feel like a lot of people try and they go to these universities and they they think they really try their best, but a lot of the time they're not really ready to actually put in the work that it would take to, you know,
Yes, because the first big sessions you'll sweat because you
absolutely.
realize, oh, not made out for this, right?
Yeah.
Like my biggest session so far, I've worked with bands, and I noticed like, okay, I have to really up my game because
Yeah.
everyone else in this room is really up there. So you kind of have to just like lift yourself and be like, no, I belong here, but then also work
Yeah.
and put in the time even afterwards to prepare and like make sure like, okay, why was that something? Then you can maybe Google or something, ask people, just make sure that you really do the work, do it proper, and also be a good person to hang around.
Oh.
If nobody likes hanging
That's a
around
good
you,
advice
they
as
don't want
well.
you in the studio either. It's a very people want, and you see that in the hip hop sessions.
Yeah.
There's always those random people that like bring food or chips or drinks or something, and you're like, why is that person here? Then you realize they make the artist feel good.
Yeah.
That's why they're there. So if you're somebody that makes other people feel good, you're more likely to be invited back than if you're, grumpy or stressed or something like that. Like,
I feel like
yeah.
that's very valuable advice as well. I mean, of course, what you did was quite like it's, as you said, it's not always easy to like get up to snuff when it comes to those sessions, because sometimes, I mean, I haven't done sessions that are nearly as big as those that you've done, but I've also had the feeling of like, oh, this is a big project. Like,
Yeah.
am I really up for this? And when you made the move to Canada, was there an element of how am I going to do this in you? Or were you just like, okay, I'm going to rock this somehow? Or,
I'm the kind of person I just plan and do things and then I think about them after. It took me about a year to realize I'm in Canada. It
oh,
was
yeah.
just, well, there was a lot of stress because since it was supposed to be a practical semester, I still had a semester after that I had to do. So I kind of had to do 3 semesters at once. So I'm done within 2.5 instead of 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So I was stressed because of that. So that kind of helps. Sometimes when you're stressed, it helps you not to think too much, right?
Yeah, right.
And
So-
then also the whole move and everything. I've never been to Canada before. I just figured it's going to be fine.
it's going to be all right.
Like sometimes I think for me it helped that all the jobs I worked said they would take me back. So I had this little, backup buffer. My mom always said like, look, if it doesn't work out, there's no shame in coming back.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. So what do I have to lose? Nothing really. Like maybe half a year of my life, but really what you're gaining is so much more because you gain not just the experience of maybe that's not what you want to do, but also you've done it. So you're not later in life regretting not having done it, right?
Yeah.
So I was more of like, no, I'm going to do it. And I did it. I didn't really think much about it, to be honest. It was just like, yep, that's happening. And then you just go for it.
And it obviously worked out pretty well.
Yeah,
for you.
I know.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to move on up to the little more technical questions. Some of them you might call a little more philosophical, but we'll get to
Okay.
that. Now, you've worked with a lot of incredible equipment. You've worked with a lot of incredible consoles. If you think back to when you just started out, like if you were to set up your home studio today, what would you say would be the things that it's worth investing into, and what would be the things you'd say save money on that and put it into something else?
So I know there's a lot of outboard gear that's emulation. I'm not too much of a fan of it. Like, I know they're not built exactly the same. And I had a big talk to our tech, and he says too, like, they use cheap parts and they don't really sound the same. So for me, instead of, buying all these certain types of outboard gear that might be cheap, but it's really not worth it, go for gear that is tried and tested, that people have used forever, that is maybe not expensive. Like, even if you start out, like, I think personally, to start out, I would probably buy a 6176 because it has a compressor and a preamp, right? So
Yeah.
you have kind of both in one, but it's also revered. Like a lot of studios have them. It's not like random gear, right? So it's something that a lot of people have used forever, keep using it. And it's a good combination to start out, I'd say, right? So then you have two gears on one. It's not really that expensive if you think about it too.
Yeah.
And then it's very important that you have at least one mic for vocal recordings. Have a 57, I mean, for other things. But you should have something different for vocals, I personally find. But I mean, have at least 557s because you can still record drums that way if need be, right? Not necessarily ideal, but you can also rent mics for sessions. People always forget about that, but if you have a big session and you want to, show off and like learn also, rent a few mics. If you have a buddy that has some mics, just ask him, hey, can I get you like a box of beer or something? Like, I don't know. It's better than having just nothing and then not being happy with it, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I used to do all the time. Like I used to always borrow gear from my university to be able to make the sessions happen because I had 3 mics
Yes.
and had 8 drums to record.
But it takes time to build it up. Like
Yeah,
people always
totally.
see these home studios and there's all this stuff and I'm like, yeah, but how long did it take that person to get to that level?
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, right? Like that's where a lot of restraints come from because, unless you have a lot of money and can just like build a home studio for quite the amount of money, it's fine. But a lot of us just start out, regular people's not sure where to start. And I think if you have a game plan and then everything you buy should have a purpose, don't buy a bunch of random stuff, Like some people have 1,000,000 guitar pedals and they only use 3. And that's fine, but you really only need those 3 and maybe 1 or 2 more and that's it. Like, it's more about quality than quantity, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think that's something that's, that can be a little destructive about social media, especially within the realms of gear, because you get lost in this like, oh, like this, I need this kind of, I don't know, I need this outboard effect, I need this guitar pedal, I need this mic. And you look at those people on YouTube and TikTok and they have these amazing home studios and you're sitting there with your Scarlett 2i2 and your SM75 and think, well, I should just quit.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the ones that persevere that really keep going.
Absolutely. So, next question is one of our favorite questions. Do you have a favorite plugin? And if so, what is it?
I actually really like the Pro Q from FabFilter.
Oh, yeah.
And I like it because, I don't know, I just learned it and I'm really quick at using it. Like it's really easy for me to use. It doesn't have a limit. So I mean, there might be a limit, but I haven't reached it yet. And I love how you can just like add another EQ in it and add another. So it's like not limited in that way. It sounds really good. And you can go very little with a noticeable effect. So I like how detailed it is. And I pretty much put at least a low cut on almost everything. So
Yeah.
I need it for a lot of reasons. Yeah.
Next question is kind of related to that. Is there a plugin or a piece of gear that you think is like a gem? It's like a very underrated thing that you use that's not necessarily widespread, but you love it?
For plugin, I think I really like the lo-fi to just thicken up vocals or decapitator, something like that.
Yeah.
Because it really helps to have a little bit more oomph to a certain thing. And you can use that on a lot of instruments too, so that's pretty handy. And for outboard gear, I mean, I have an 1176 Blue Stripe and I love it because I just plug things in and it sounds good. And I know it sounds lazy, but it already sounds good. I don't really have to change as much. So that's pretty handy to have in your corner.
Oh, that sounds
Yeah.
pretty good. Do you think, I mean, this kind of goes into one of the last questions already, but I just thought of it. There's a lot of AI tools coming out, especially when it comes to mixing and mastering. And I feel like every time I look up, plugin releases, there's more and more and more.
Yeah.
What do you think? Where do you think are we going with that? Do you think that our jobs are going to be in jeopardy soon at some point, or is it not going to get to that point when it comes to AI mixing?
I haven't seen too much AI mixing yet, but I know that there has been things like Lander that master
Oh
for you,
yeah.
right? Like that's been around for a long time, and mastering engineers are still needed. So I kind of hope the same for the mixing, but because it has also more elements, you have to understand that AI never creates something innovative. Like there's nothing where, because it only takes what has been there and just interpolates and just like, well, that's that genre, what you want, that's what they sound like, and it's like a weird mesh. But I don't think it will take away from clients that are not serious about their music. You know, there's random people that just want to have one record for their family mixed and stuff. Like those kind of people will probably go towards AI because it's probably cheaper. It's maybe less personal contact, like a lot of people that don't really go to studios often, right? But I think that the professional musicians will still value a real mixing engineer. I don't see that going away because they can also easier say like, oh, can you just like switch that a little bit? And we all know that like musicians have a way to communicate where you have to decipher first what they actually mean, right? Like we've all been there where like somebody's like, oh, that sounds like shit. And you're like, what do you not like? And they're like, oh, the snare is just a dB too high. And you're like, well, that's a whole nother thing, right? Than saying this doesn't sound good. Like, so because I can't really read between the lines in that way, I think mixing is still something that we'll all have to thankfully do.
I'd hope so. I mean, it's definitely one of my favorite activities in the whole field of audio, like because it's technical and at the same time it's so creative. I feel
It
like, and
is.
as we're on the topic of mixing, a lot of people struggle with vocal mixing, vocal productions, and I feel like there's a lot of people working in home studios that are fairly good at recording and mixing the instruments, but when it comes to the vocals, that's always kind of the point where the professional world definitely has an audible difference to the, say, amateur producer world. Do you have any vocal production secrets or tips to when you're sitting there and you feel like, okay, I like the mix but the vocals are just not in there, they're just not,
Yeah.
it's just not a blend, the vocals feel like they sit on top of the mix,
Yeah.
what would be your advice?
So I think the first thing for a lot of people is you have to stop thinking of a vocal as an instrument. Although it is an instrument, it needs a lot different work. Like it's just it's a whole nother world on itself. And if you can't get it to sit in the mix, you have to first look, is it maybe the master bus compressor, right? Like sometimes you don't have it set right, so it just doesn't even glue together with the rest. And then maybe start mixing around the vocals too. If you put the vocals in last, there might not be any room in the mix to have even vocals. So maybe put them in before you have all of the extra guitars in, just so you have already a room for the vocals to sit and then everything can build around it. Because it is one of the most important elements of a mix, really. And nowadays, a lot of vocals get mixed higher and higher. It is just one of the most important things. So you might want to treat it important and put it in earlier in your mixing process rather than just have a full-on perfect instrumental and then you have no room for the vocals to even go there because, in your spatial environment of the mix, there's nothing left that's not used, right? Like, so you might want to just put that in a little earlier and then try to also put some effects on it and see where it starts sitting with the rest. Like reverb can do a lot. And I don't mean like reverb, like crazy reverb, but just like a touch where you don't hear it in the mix, but it like puts it a little back in there. Yeah.
I feel like that's amazing advice. I've definitely been guilty of neglecting the vocals until the very end and then not really having any space left in the mix. So
Yeah.
that's really great.